Good evening. I'm Mamta Bhardwaj and I lead employer branding at the Nudge Institute. And welcome to another edition of Jigyaasa. This time, Jigyaasa with the ecosystem, a platform for you to hear from social sector professionals about their experiences solving some of the hardest problems from within the social sector. Now, Jigyaasa as a conversation, as you know, helps you unpack the work and life of a social sector professional and in the process give you the necessary tools to access the sector as a part of your own journey. In this edition of Jigyasa with the Ecosystem, we are joined by Kartik, founder of iSTEM. Inclusive STEM or iSTEM is a disability led innovation hub, turning lived experience into accessible technology that sparks agency and opportunity. And we are also joined by Vignesh, who is leading the AI effort at the Nudge Institute. Before I invite our speakers to tell us what it is that they do and how they interact with AI, a little bit about the topic at hand. Of course, we know we are diving into this very intriguing and exciting world of this buzzword AI, but how do we bring it home to the social sector? The Indian social sector is innovating and entering new spaces faster than ever in today's day. Among other things, there is an increasing need for talent as well as technology that will enable us to create impact at scale. And with the emergence of AI, there is tremendous promise in assistance for daily tasks and activities, as we all have experienced, and this through access to platforms like ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, Napkin, what have you, right? Among the more innocent use cases, we're seeing rewriting emails, captions, designing decks, analyzing and visualizing data, which have made communication time efficient, legible, and for the most part engaging. But beyond being an assistant to daily activities, where is AI really begging to make an impact, and how can we unlock its potential? This edition, we will explore how we can leverage AI to scale impact and bring perspectives from our speakers on two distinct vantage points: AI enabled solutions in the social sector and AI as an enabler to sharpen solutions in the social sector. And before I invite our speakers, just a quick note on our other special feature: curated conversations, an opportunity for aspirants to learn more about specific priority openings at the Nudge Institute. You will see a link pop up in our comment section soon, and you have this opportunity to sign up for specific priority roles, like I mentioned, and have an opportunity to speak with Nudsters to unpack a little more about the role and understand the role from and what it means to the Nut Institute. And now I will stop and invite our speakers to introduce themselves and speak a little about how they found themselves drawn to the social impact space and set context about their relationship with AI. Vignesh, if we may start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Mamta, and a very good evening to all the viewers. Uh, so, let me just begin with what I do at the Nudge. Currently, I'm anchoring the AI effort across the organization, um, across different programs that the Nudge operates, to see and to increase adoption of AI both within the staff circles and in the programs that we run. So that's probably some mandate that I am working on. Uh, Prior to this, I was in the skill development vertical of Nudge, where uh, we experimented very initially with AI. Even actually, when GPT was launched, and probably two or something like that, is when we started off introducing AI in our workflows there, where we were training students in spoken English, and we found great value in how AI can be leveraged. And that was my foray, and that is how I found myself at this intersection of technology and social impact. Just the sheer ability of technology to scale impact is what drew me, and is still where I want to create an impact, which is why I'm here. Over to Karthik.
Yeah, thanks so much. Again, thanks for the opportunity to be here. I think for me, so I came into the social sector right from my own lived experience. So I was born blind, and when I was in the 10th grade, I was told that I would not be able to pursue sciences despite me wanting to become an engineer because the idea was that at that time only blind students could pursue humanities or commerce without mathematics. And that's where advocacy started for me to try and change the systems for myself, But that then led to, how do we actually start to change this for others as well? When I enrolled in 11th, after advocating, I also realized that none of the textbooks were accessible to me, and I had to spend nearly 4 hours every single day typing out the textbooks because they were not available to me in a format that I could consume. Later, I realized that there were both attitudinal challenges as well as these systemic barriers that community as a whole faced, with 96% of the web being inaccessible even today. And so that's how iSTEM came into being, which is the organization that I run. At iSTEM, ultimately, our focus is to ensure how people with disabilities can find meaningful employment. And we look at various factors that today, for example, pose a challenge to realizing that. And one of the key challenges as part of that is lack of opportunity and upskilling and resources due to the digital spaces being inaccessible. So, and my lived experience really kind of got me into this. And now, of course, we have technology that helps us convert inaccessible content into accessible and usable formats, but then also that is able to provide people with disabilities relevant information, given the fragmentation that we see online as it relates to relevant information for this community, and ultimately also helping people with disabilities not only consume information but also take action on that information using agentic AI. We got involved with AI much like Vignesh, actually much before LLMs and multimodal models came into being. So much before ChatGPT and the likes. In 2020, during COVID, we actually realized that there was, of course, this proliferation in the amount of content that was being created online. And you would think that that would actually be good for people with disabilities. We actually realized that it was quite the opposite, where the gap between people being able to access this content and people with disabilities not being able to do so just widened, given inaccessibility. And so that's when we realized that it wasn't just about creating the ecosystem and getting for example, allies on board, but it was also very much about really trying to solve this issue of inaccessibility more broadly. And so we started experimenting with AI, given my background also in AI as well as my co-founder. So we started developing some models to try and see how we can actually visually analyze the various documents and the structure of documents, and then use that to convert those into accessible formats. And then, of course, that of course was accelerated when LLMs came about, where we could now use this to improve the accuracy, but then also do a lot more stuff, as I mentioned, around relevant information and completing actions, rather than just making content itself accessible. So that's a little bit about who I am, what iSTEM is, and how we got started with AI.
Great. Thank you, Kartik. Thank you for giving us an understanding of the landscape and how it has sort of evolved over time. Just a call out to our audiences, people who have joined us online, please share your questions, thoughts, comments with us in the comment section, and we'll try and take as many as possible towards the end of the session to be addressed by both of our speakers. So having said that, moving on, getting into the matter itself, Vignesh, maybe I'd like to bring you in here to help us understand, let's begin from the beginning, right? So help us understand the different open access platforms that are available to us, and also differentiate between these different terms that we hear: generative AI, predictive AI, agentic AI. So just help us understand this whole space a little bit.
Sure. Very briefly, I think AI is not a recent phenomenon. As Kartik rightly said, it was around quite a long time. I think the first chatbot was developed in MIT in 1970s, called Elisa. So it is, I could misremember the name, but the chatbot was in MIT. So the the concept of AI is around, and so the Turing test, popularly known as Turing test, which to identify whether a human or a computer came into being. So it is quite a it's been there for a while. But what has happened in the last uh, couple of years is the real proliferation of these technologies into our daily lives. Uh, it could be simple in your camera, where you have those AI functions that sort of remove backgrounds, clean the photo as you are clicking the photo, so that the processing time is removed. Or more relevantly, the Amazons of the world, the Netflix of the world, where it offers what is the next recommended buy, right? So you buy something, and then there is a recommendation engine that throws you up saying this is the next. So uh, that is predictive AI. So that was sort of where the industry was headed, saying that let us map the habits of each individual who we interact with on a platform at a platform level, and then we'll be in having corpus of data where we can predict what the user's interest will be. So that is how you end up when Netflix recommends you to read or view the next movie based on your likes. It is tailored to you as an individual. Generative AI is an improvement, or it's sort of a different league where it started creating content, and that is when the world took notice. Till then, AI was something, this esoteric thing which only few nerdy people within the confines of a room are just coding and hacking and doing some things. But with the emergence of generative AI, where the same data, what people realized is the same data can be trained a machine to create something new of the data. So, for example, you have, say, corpus of literature, English literature that is trained into a system, basis the words that the system is trained on. The system produces something. So that is a generative AI. Then you have an extension of that is how do you make this work? How do you make the whole AI architecture work is where the industry is headed today, to look at, can I create small agents which do what I am supposed to do as an individual on a computer, so that my productivity increases. So the repeated mundane tasks, like for example, say sending mails, a use case can be that you have, say, a list of 500 emails in your organization. uh, so you have to send some reminder mail or newsletter. So you cannot go to each individual mail, keep sending the newsletter, right? So it's a lot of work. So instead, what you do is to automate, but instead of automating it by coding, you ask AI for the code and implement it, and the AI runs on its own. So that is where the agentic AI comes in. So these are uh, the basic differences. In terms of open access, I think we are there are couple of platforms which are, when you say open access, it can be, say, free models available. So there are paid models available. So the free LLM, so which are called large language models, which are the popular ones that we use, which is ChatGPT, Grok, uh, Claude. So these are all LLMs which are in a freemium bracket, because some of the features are free, which is basic. You can interact with them, you can have conversations with them. But if you want those models to perform functions other than those, so then it goes into a paid model. Uh, Contrarily, what people have also done is, especially OpenAI, they have lent out APIs, they have lent out tools. Uh, I will just hold on a second for the train to pass so that there is.
We can hear you.
So, what OpenAI platforms have done, and many platforms have also followed, is to create a API which we can incorporate in our solutions and use the model, so that it is easier for us to use the model. So by open access, this is where the industry is. And uh, unlike Google, which has something for non-profits, uh, till now I have not come across AI specifically which is working for non-profits, or there's non-profit specific pricing strategies. But whatever is available is good enough for us to be using, which we will discuss in the course of
Yeah.
discussion.
Great. Thank you, Vignesh, for helping us understand what is accessible to us and what kind of work we can incorporate it in, right, on a daily basis or a regular mundane tasks, like you just said. Um, Kartik, I'd like to bring you in and for you to speak from your experience in terms of what are the kinds of AI enabled or AI led solutions that exist or there is scope for currently in the sector to solve problems or to solve for things like we work towards livelihood, we work towards access, empowerment. What is that space like? And we'd like for you to throw some light on that.
Yeah, and I'm going to share from our own journey and experiences at ISTEM, and then I'm going to go a little broader. I think one of the things that we've been trying to do, given our focus on access and inclusivity, is really think about what are some of the challenges that we have faced where AI could be particularly helpful, right? Because as such, AI can do a lot. When you think about, what chatbots can do, when you think about what image generation can do or video generation can do, of course it can basically do a lot of stuff, as you mentioned, in terms of administrative tasks. But when you start to think about how this actually starts to influence and impact, some of the problems that we're working towards anyway, and we'll get to this in a little later as well, specifically on the problems. But this is the kind of the vantage point that we take to kind of really think through what are some of the things that we've seen in the pre-AI days that were particularly hard to solve for, where AI today can be particularly useful. And some of the areas where we're seeing it do really well is, of course, when you think about education and upskilling. In the work that we do, and not just for disabilities, for also other communities, personalization has been a key challenge. How do you ensure that you're actually able to develop a system that is highly relatable, a system that is able to speak and understand, the student, for example, in terms of how they best learn. Are there certain specific things that you need to reinforce? Maybe there are specific things that you need to convey in a different manner. But then also, once you kind of look at all of that, how do you convey to the teachers and other admin staff in terms of how this education is going, and are there specific areas where human intervention is required, in particular, to actually further accelerate how someone is learning? And so, personalized tutoring, which kind of starts with, in our case, for example, making things accessible, but then goes into pedagogy and thinking about how people can actually learn, is something that is extremely helpful. Also, then kind of thinking about how do you actually help with career discovery, where a lot of the times the general career discovery that people were able to do through resources available online weren't necessarily tailored to them, did not really factor in all of the nuances and all of the circumstances that a person might have, either because of their disability or because of their past experience or because of the specific region that they're from. And so today, for the first time, AI is actually able to personalize a lot of that and ensure that the information that we're providing is not just generic information that may or may not be actionable, but is instead information that is actually grounded in the lived reality of the beneficiary or the user who's actually using that system. So that's been like another sort of big win, or something that where we were seeing AI play a particularly important role. Beyond that, we're also seeing things in terms of recommender systems. When you think about jobs, how do you actually recommend jobs to people? How do you ensure that it's not noisy, right? Where there's basically just a job feed and people are having to kind of just look at what might be a good fit, but you kind of really distill it down to specific opportunities that might be particularly relevant for people. That is again something that it has been extremely helpful, but also this notion of transferable skills. Because oftentimes what happens is that the way our education system is, people don't really understand there's a lot more that they can do. And many people actually do have low expectations of themselves, especially from underrepresented communities that we in particular work with. So how are you then able to also guide them and help them understand that there's a lot more that they can do, draw sort of these parallels with other people who've been in their shoes, who've done similar stuff, all in a way that is cohesive and relatable and understandable for someone who might, for example, even be using technology for the first time, right? So really simplifying it, bringing it closer to the individual and helping them understand all of this is something that AI has enabled. Now, if you go beyond, for example, education and livelihoods to even, for example, things like healthcare, that, of course, where providing a lot of support to community health workers, actually looking at the advances in medical sciences, specifically around diagnostics that AI is now able to help with, that just wasn't possible before. Being able to process wide amounts of data, localization, right? All of that is something that has been extremely, extremely helpful. Data collection, really being able to understand what's happening on the ground. in a very unstructured way, where the user is actually able to just talk out loud. There's not necessarily a confined, structured way in which you're trying to capture, their perspective, but you're able to then ultimately convert this unstructured data into structured data that actually can be used and analyzed at scale. All of this is something that just wasn't possible before, right? So those kind of things. Disaster management is yet another one, right? Like, really being able to provide support, being able to prioritize what actually makes sense on the ground, is something else that has been extremely helpful. So right from relatability, personalization, localization, ensuring that you're able to cut through the noise and really provide relevant information to people at scale is something that we're seeing AI play a particularly important role across various sectors, right from education to upskilling to health and much more. So that's kind of where I'll leave it at that, and then happy to go into more details as we go.
Great. Thanks, Kartik. Also, thank you to our audience who are sharing their comments and questions with us. Please continue to do so. We'll try and take them towards the end of the session. And quickly, I'd go back to that part where you spoke about personalizing solutions, right, and bringing it closer to lived reality. And actually bring that to Vignesh and say, what is it that AI can do in terms of adding value to impact at scale? Because at the Nudge, we obviously prioritize scale. It's one of our, it's one of our spirits, and we do solutions at scale. So what is it that AI can do to support this? While we heard from Kartik about solutions that can impact a larger audience, in the current work that we do, how can AI play a role in strengthening our focus towards scale, not only in on-ground programs and beneficiaries and participants like we speak about, but also in more central functions, right? Like it could be a finance, legal, marketing. How can this play a role which are integral to a social sector organization as well? What is AI's role there from your perspective?
So, uh, the social sector uh, faces a perennial problem of talent, which is people coming into this sector to take up, uh, solve challenges. And uh, a major reason for that is probably salaries and the availability of work, etc., etc. But also the way uh, the social sector is structured in terms of how it is working. Uh, AI can actually really make an impact there, because overnight you can create, say for example, more grant documents, where you spend the same amount of time creating, say 5 days to create a grant document. You are able to have with the same resource, because you obviously, as a social sector, uh, as a social enterprise, you cannot employ more people. You don't have the luxury of getting more manpower. So what you instead do is you try ways to boost productivity. And I think this is something that what we are trying to do at Nudge as well, where we are looking at how simple things like writing, say, proposals, for example, how can it be boosted better in a way that it reflects our language. I think the key is that. So quite often I am asked, I could just write something in ChatGPT and it will give me a donor grant. But the idea is, how do you put it in brand guideline? Because we at Nudge have a certain lingo, a certain language, certain vocabulary where we use for certain items, right? So that kind of a vocabulary, if it has to be fit in, then it has to be trained a little on the kind of content that we would need. So in a nutshell, I think people having the resources, boosting productivity, especially in social sector, is very important. And that is why uh, this can scale up. The second one, obviously, Karthik mentioned about skilling, and I myself was one of at Nudge. We did experiment out some of the solutions to look at personalization, especially even from a livelihood point of view, right? When you are dealing with, say, uh, DDs, as we call them, women in self-help groups in a remote part in Bihar or in Jharkhand or UP. Uh, all good. The program gives them, say, poultry or goatry for them to rear and earn money out of it. But ultimately, if there is an issue with the goats, or if there's something that the didi doesn't understand what is happening to the poultry that she has, she needs advice. She needs some tailored uh, suggestions to handle the issues that are there at her hand. Uh, this is the tool, because you cannot have uh, a generic advice being granted to somebody there at that level in the language that she understands, which is what Karthik also spoke about. Inclusivity, where you have a you have a technology that understands your regional language. It can respond to you in the regional language, so the accessibility is totally, the bar is lowered. Uh, so at scale, if you think about it, especially in a context like India, which has so many multiple languages, dialects, and for any one person to understand and to be able to reciprocate it, I think it's a humongous challenge. So uh, that is where AI comes into picture and helps a lot of these solutions. There are other interesting models now. What AI opens up in terms of livelihood opportunities, for example, say training of models requires a lot of data. It can be voice data, it can be textual data, it can be visual data. So this entire process of identifying data, annotating or labeling the data, I think has become a big part, and especially where women are involved at scale. So, with women with access to smartphones or any form of technological device, they will be enabled and empowered to contribute to the training, and hence have a livelihood stream opened up for themselves. Uh, there are a few startups which are already working on this model. One of it is being incubated by Nudge, or was incubated by Nudge earlier. But the point I'm trying to make is, I think there are interesting avenues, interesting opportunities being opened up for people at scale, especially with personalization. But from a sector point of view, I think it is important to integrate it and embed it within organizations as early as possible to have productivity gains. Uh, yeah.
Thank you, Vignesh. Karthik, I'd like to bring a question to you now. Why we heard from both of you in terms of how AI is really pushing the frontiers, and we're unlocking productivity. We're also unlocking a lot of solutions that are being made possible to reach a larger audience, right? Having now that said, what is the role of AI in driving inclusive designs? And while we did tip our hat to the possibilities, and in the earlier response, to put it in simple words, if AI were a person, what is the role that it would be playing in an organization?
Yeah. I think one of the things that I keep hearing a lot from people when, even developing my own capacity as a leader in an organization is simplify, simplify, simplify. And I think that is what Vignesh and I have been kind of talking about all this while, which is, oftentimes in the past, adoption was a key challenge. Adoption continues to be a challenge, but it's a different kind of a challenge. But what AI has now allowed us to do is actually really try and solve for that simplification problem, or really translate otherwise very complex ideas, things, resources, whatnot, into things that people can just understand. Right? In the past, we basically used to have these chatbots and whatnot. We would have these IVR systems that would basically speak in only a couple of languages, and then it's not just about the language, it's also about the word choice. We would have to hard code things and things like that, right? So now I kind of really, for one, think of AI as a translator that is actually able to take those ideas that we might have as an organization and really kind of tailor it to different audiences and different people in the way that they best understand, right? So that definitely is a big one. And kind of related to that is this notion of amplifier, right? So where AI is now able to actually, because of this personalization, because it is able to do what it's able to do, help you reach a lot more people, especially people that might otherwise be completely out of reach for a lot of organizations like us, especially a young organization, for example, like ours, which basically has like what 10 people right now. And so, how do we then kind of really develop our solution in a way leveraging AI, where we're able to go to multiple states, have it converse in different languages, different dialects, but more importantly, as Vignesh said, also leverage information that makes sense in that context. That grounding with relevant information is extremely important, and that is what AI, when deployed and implemented responsibly, is actually able to do today. So that's a big one. So a translator and an amplifier. Now, the thing there is AI actually can also be a gatekeeper in some sense, and they're both the pros and cons here, right? Like where the responsibility kind of thing comes in. Where if you design AI in a way where you are not specifically grounding it in data that is relevant to a lot of these underrepresented communities, then it can also do harm, where there might be biases that might just surface. So that's kind of where we have to be a little careful. AI can certainly be very helpful in helping you kind of achieve what you want to do, but also can be a gatekeeper in some ways, effectively blocking out various communities if we do not implement it and deploy it in ways that actually make sense. So that's kind of where I think inclusive design also becomes important, right? Where we have to think about how are we training the AI, the data that we're using. Where again, completely agree with Vignesh on the kinds of new opportunities, livelihood opportunities themselves that are being created right now. And incidentally, we're actually a part of the Digital Naukri Challenge that Nudge is doing, and it's actually great to see the work that a lot of the other organizations are also doing, right? Where this is now opening up possibilities and unlocking sort of new even skill sets that are more approachable for entry level skill sets that are now more approachable for masters that just weren't possible, which also then helps ensure that the AI that is actually being developed is representative of everyone, including the people who actually need it the most. So that's kind of what I would say. Like, certainly inclusive design is something that is important, something that we really need to work towards. AI does provide us a way to kind of do that, but of course, we have to really think through the guardrails and really think through the nuances of trying to actually realize it in a way that actually makes sense.
Right. Thank you, Kartik. You actually did respond to my next question, which I had lined up. I'd like to bring that to Vignesh because we want to hear from both of you. And this is the main reason we do Jigyasa, for people to understand where they can begin their journey of working with the social sector, with the existing skill sets that they have, and how they can, make progress even in terms of learning and developing their skill sets to suit the social sector, right? So Vignesh, to understand from you in terms of how innovators can pave the path towards solving for the social sector with AI in their toolkit, right? So, what are the long-standing problems that we would immediately like for AI to help us navigate?
Uh, all right, let me start with the caution because I think the wicked problems are wicked for a reason, which is that it is a very complex, hard problem, especially in a social context setting. It is often influenced not just by technology, but more by behavior, more by social norms, more by attitudes, even seemingly what we probably or many of us don't understand how the world and society functions also plays an important role in shaping how the wicked problems do persist. But having said that, I think in our humble attempt to actually look at it, I think innovations definitely play a very key path and role in using AI to do it. So we spoke about Karthik did speak about education, skilling, livelihood opportunities. They are part of the Digital Naukri Challenge. But environment is another area where AI can really make a difference. Disaster management was touched upon. With increasing climate change, there are possibilities, and we are seeing it all around us. Floods, across regions. Rainfall increase, intensity of rainfall is higher than usual. So a lot of these problems that is at the moment, we innovators obviously try to do it. The way to go about is what I can look at it, and I think from my experience of working at the nudge is that we look at how the behavior shapes the important aspect, and then see what is that behavior that we want to replicate uh, by an AI. For example, in our skilling sessions, we noticed it was a practice session where people could come and practice language, which is what the skilling is all about. Uh, English language specifically. Uh, People were not comfortable talking to each other, and this was live class. It was not an app where they can come and interact. So it was a live class with a trainer-led class. But even then, the effectiveness of that kind of a setup did not work well for the students, because they said, uh, how am I supposed to know whether I am, in the right path, or am I, where should I learn, what should I correct? So we started analyzing what are those factors, and we experimented differently, and we said, okay, ultimately a moderator, the initial reading, actually students said, no, we are not comfortable with AI. We want a human to tell us what is right and what is wrong. But when we double clicked on it, and we understood that, okay, so it is not the human person as such, but what the person brings to the table, it is basically to give feedback. So then we started looking at ways to give that feedback, and how do we use AI to give that feedback. So the pathway to do it is this, where you look at isolate behaviors, isolate the exact pain point that AI can solve for. AI is not a panacea for everything. AI is not a magic bullet that, the next day onwards students start learning. Doesn't happen. But where we need to solve for is to clearly look at impact, clearly look at the areas where we need to solve for, and then apply AI, then apply innovations. And in this case, it worked, because we were able to identify and isolate that the problem of feedback in practice was what the students needed. It was not the human per se. So we automated the system uh, through the GPT models, through LLM models, and we enabled a conversation or feedback to go onto their WhatsApp message after their class, uh, with elements of what went well, what did not go well, and where they could have done better. So these were the three things that would go to them regularly after their class, live class. So uh, there, as I said, this is education, but also in skill, in environment, in health, in agriculture, because uh, again, agri is a major problem, especially if we have to solve for uh, poverty in country, because a lot of our rural workforce needs to be uh, you know compensated for their efforts in some ways. And how do you do that? There are loss of crops due to pests, due to weeds, due to non understanding of scientific principles of how what is happening, whether I should put, say, kind of fertilizers that I need to put. So all of these are personalized, contextualized, because there can be a, I can go Google something today and understand what are the nutrients required for my crop, but it could be in a context in, say, in Tamil Nadu. It might not be relevant to me in the North Karnataka region, because of the soil conditions and the climate conditions that I am exposed to. So understanding these different contexts and personalizing solutions, and that is where the innovations lie, and that I think is where we are headed towards.
Thank you, Vignesh. This speaks to the larger objectives of organizations as a whole, right? And founders and people who are at the forefront of these solutions. Uh, Karthik, I'd like to bring you in to understand, with when there's emerging technology, there's also emerging career paths. And for us to understand from you about what it takes to sort of master AI, and if there is space for, these courses and programs which are dime a dozen now, all these online sort of packages that come in. What is the space that they occupy in building one's skill set in solving for the social sector?
Sure. Before that, I just wanted to kind of double down on what Vignesh was saying and kind of share his experience. I think I have to thank the Nudge for this. We were a part of the incubator. And even before the crazy AI days, I remember my first call with my mentor. That was probably the hardest call that I've ever had. Because we being young technologists, we thought, okay, well, we have a technology, we have thousands of users using our technology, we're able to achieve a certain accuracy, and it's able to save people's time, and so this is great. And so we went into the meeting talking about all of our solution and how it works and all of that, and our mentor goes, so what? And this question of like, so what, basically continued throughout the meeting. That was a theme, which is all to say, and we learned it the hard way. So that's kind of one classic example, right? Where we were so focused on technology, and we thought that really we're trying to solve the systemic barrier of accessibility, and of course we're solving for digital accessibility, so it does make sense that technology would be the answer. And so we're going to develop this technology, suddenly people are going to use this, we're already seeing thousands use it, thousands more would use it, and this is going to achieve scale in however we define scale. And then reality hit us, right? Where you really have to think through adoption. You have to think through that entire life cycle of a user using that AI system, or any piece of technology for that matter, right? And sort of the ecosystem around them, the context that they are in, and whether that system actually is even going to be helpful. And so what we realized, for example, as part of that was that more than 60% of people that we were actually working with did not even have a lot of technology background or experience. And in our case, it's not just about basic technology, upskilling that they have to have. They also have to have experience specifically with what is known as assistive technologies, which is essentially software that either speak out everything on your computer screen, in my case, or software that provide, for example, captions or other sort of support for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. And so we realized very soon that actually was not happening at all. And even where that was not the case, you provide them accessible content, but then they were actually not able to apply that. And I just kind of share that, and sorry to digress a little bit, but I kind of share that to just sort of again highlight and reinforce what Vignesh was saying, where AI can solve parts of the problem, but these are wicked problems for a reason, right? And so really designing around them, ensuring that there are programs that actually in some ways actually leverage that technology in ways that make sense to actually then have an impact, which is ultimately the goal, is extremely important. And so then of course for us we realized that there has to be a solid programming, a solid sort of programs on the ground that would help with adoption, that would also of course do human support in addition to that AI, where the human plus AI becomes extremely important, which I think is the case for pretty much everything even today, right? Like not just deploying the AI solution and leaving it at that, but ensuring that there's this human component to provide support as a fallback, to ensure that AI is actually doing what it's supposed to do, is extremely, extremely important. And in some sense, that actually connects to your the current question. I think when I think about how should people think about upskilling themselves, people in the sector, I think certainly these courses can help, but we actually should very clearly define what mastery even means here in this context, right? I don't think mastery here necessarily means, hey, you've got to know every single model that is coming out, because the AI space is moving really, really fast. There's of course the GPTs, there are Geminis and Claudes, and so there are LLMs, and then there are small language models, different variants of deployment, etc., etc. I think what's really more important is to think about and start with the problem that you again solve, right? And thinking about, are there those specific areas that you're able to isolate, as Vignesh was saying, where AI in particularly might be very helpful, and then going from there. If it's, for example, about, hey, in our case, for example, when we realize that 60% of people do not know how to use technology, they do not have smartphones, then kind of starting from there and saying, could we actually expose natural conversations over flip phones, over IVR calls, so that people who have flip phones or feature phones can actually use it as well, even if they do not have smartphones. And then you start to think about, okay, well, if you have a normal phone, a feature phone or whatever, and you're having these conversations, how do we ensure that these are private? How do we think about privacy there? How do we think about the voice AI that's going to be at play to ensure that the conversation that you're going to have on that phone call is going to be as natural, intuitive as possible? How are we going to ensure that there are evaluation methods in place to ensure that we can actually continuously improve these calls to ensure effectiveness, and all of that, right? So you have to start from a problem, think about the solution, and then, in my experience, the best way is to then think about how AI specifically can help with the specific aspects of those solutions, and what that then means in terms of specific technologies that you may need to interact with, and then kind of going deeper into those technologies. The good part, again, is that there's been a lot of productization of these models, such that you'd actually almost never need to interact with sort of the models directly unless you're a developer. There are no code ways of interacting with it, right? And there are, of course, a lot of courses and programs that actually help you kind of do that through things like Prompt Studios and Flow Studios, whatever, AI Studios broadly, where you're able to do this, right? So you're able to basically create these, evaluate these, continuously monitor these to understand what your users are doing, take all of that, and then also analyze these, and that then kind of feeds into the broader M&E side of things as well. And then, of course, you kind of bring in the change, or adapt the program accordingly as well. So I think it's those things that and that framework that has worked well for us, that I do think probably is the way to go, as opposed to just generic sort of AI programs, which may or may not be immediately relevant to the specific problem that someone might be trying to solve.
Thank you, Kartik. Quickly moving on to some of our audience questions as well. We'll try and take as many as possible. Vignesh, I'd like to bring that question to you, but with a layer of something that an audience member has asked us in terms of what is the basic AI development sector employee should know. I'd like to broaden this and say, what is the basic AI that one should start familiarizing themselves with?
I think from my experience of obviously trying to improve adoption within the organization at large itself, I think the uh, roadblock that I have noticed is skepticism about AI. Uh, that without having a skeptic mindset to AI, and looking at how AI can be improved, I think just sheer ability to learn is something, uh, the first part of what development sector professional aspires to be. Uh, there are no, I mean, courses are there. There are dime and dozen videos that are available on YouTube for multitude of use cases that you can solve for. Uh, but just the ability to learn, looking at AI uh, as an assistant. Many people start writing. I mean, they have written about how you can use it as an intern. So use it as an intern. It needs training. It is not going to be perfect. Uh, you don't tell it today to produce a concept node or a data analysis, and you expect the accurate uh, response to it. Uh, but having that conversations and using it or trying to use it, I think it's the primary motivating factor for anybody to come in. We have seen use cases where people in the organization with absolutely no coding background, no technology background whatsoever, uh, today they are comfortably using AI to give them codes, to teach them how do I get something to work in a, say, a simple Excel sheet or a Google sheet, or a presentation. How do I make this presentation better? What do I put in the presentation? How do I structure this presentation? So there is that bar that has really come down. I think just having that ability to spot use cases within their workflows, and there are tools that are already available. If not, you can use AI to create something uh, for your own benefit. I think these are the three things that I would urge
Thanks,
people.
Vignesh. And that is also sort of reflective of my own journey. Began as a skeptic, and I think there have been a lot of different conversations that we've had within the organization and beyond, and also because it is the buzzword, like we said, that has sort of eased up the process for many of us to collaborate with AI. I think in a more effective manner. Picking up another question from our audience comments, one for Kartik. How would you tackle bad data generated by AI? I actually would like to add on another question in this for you to respond to. How does one ensure data secrecy while using AI, especially when organizations are submitting proposals? So, bad data generated by AI. Second is the secrecy aspect of data that is put into these AI
Sure.
platforms.
Yeah, the bad data is a problem, and I think the really the way to think about that is, one is what can we do technically to solve for that, but two also is setting the right expectations for what AI can and cannot do, and what AI should and should not be used for at least today, especially when working in some of the sensitive use cases that we all work in, or with specific communities that we sort of work in. I'll give you an example. ISM has a career discovery sort of assistant, and then they were using the base models, the regular models, the chat GPTs and others of the world. And I would often ask, okay, well, I'm blind, and I'm a software engineer. What should I do? And um, I would say about 80% of the times the answer would start with, "Well, I'm so sorry that you're blind." And I'm like, "Well, I'm not sorry that I'm blind. I don't know why you're sorry that I'm blind." And I laugh it off, but no, it's an issue, right? Because in some sense, um, you're perpetuating a lot of the biases that exist in our society, which is expected, because AI is actually trained on massive amounts of data that essentially reflect a lot of the biases that we as society have. A bigger version of that, in our case, for example, is that, as I said, 96% of the web is inaccessible, which basically means that 96% of the code online is inaccessible, and no developer is writing code from scratch anymore. Everyone is basically turning to these co-pilots and writing that to using those to write code. And that becomes an issue, because if you're actually using these agents to write code, now in some sense all of the progress that we made to encourage developers to do the right thing, and write code that is accessible, in some ways we're going back on that. And so the way to do that ultimately again comes down to training, fine-tuning the models, grounding the models in data that are reflective of the communities that you're working with, which is where again the responsible deployment that I was talking about before becomes important. So in our case, for example, what we did is we took hundreds of stories of people with disabilities across various sectors, across various regions, across various lived realities, thinking about intersectionality as well of other identities with disability. And we basically said, okay, we're going to use this data, and then let it on top of what we already get from the base LLM models, and ensure that, and then of course, guardrails through prompting. And, people kind of generally talk about like these complex things around training and fine tuning and whatnot, which can help. We do that. We do some of that as well, but you'd be surprised how much even just effective prompting can help to ensure that there are guardrails in place that prevent that kind of bias perpetuation, or insensitive ableism in our case, for example, that would be bad for our communities. So all of that goes a very long way. I think every single system prompt, when designed for the sector, should have these guardrails in place, especially in sensitive use cases like, for example, mental health and other things like that, where decision making is involved. That just has to happen, and we can't just rely on the guardrails that a lot of these providers provide us, because they are not where they need to be, and also certainly do not capture the Indian realities. I think to the part about again, privacy and secrecy of proposals, that's again where really understanding that fine print becomes important. There are guarantees that a lot of these providers provide, under certain plans, right? So, for example, if you think about, what OpenAI provides as part of the team plan or the enterprise plan. And by the way, there are some nonprofit discounts that OpenAI now provides for the team plan. I mean, just use that as an example, where your data is yours, and that is actually not going to be used to train the models at all. And that, of course, is the best when you're using open source models, because that's kind of where you essentially are able to deploy it. You essentially are able to then, keep your data, and use your data in ways that actually make sense, right? So those kinds of things are helpful. So just kind of understanding what guarantees the provider provides, or if possible, using open models is probably the best way to ensure that the data remains within that. And this, of course, becomes even more important when you're working with any sort of data for the users that you're working with, beneficiaries that you're working with. So that's again something kind of to consider as well. One final thing I'll say is, related to all of this is also the deployment platform and the privacy considerations there as well. So as I was saying, when people are using phones, these phones are actually often shared by family members, especially, for example, in tier 2, 3 cities, rural areas, whatnot. And how do you actually design your system in a way? And again, this has nothing to do with AI. How do you design your intervention, your system in a way where there is privacy built in, such that if there might be any sensitive conversations that these users might be having with AI, then how do you ensure that they remain they remain private, and you continue to sort of uphold the trust that your user or beneficiary have in you and the program that you run. That's also very critical to consider as you're thinking through the system deployment.
Thank you, Kartik, for rounding up your response and giving us different perspectives to think about AI. I'd actually like to bring this topic to you as well, Vignesh, because that is something that our comment section is discussing actively as well, in terms of how do you ensure that AI solutions are used in a fair, unbiased, and inclusive manner. And Kartik gave us plenty insights about that. From your perspective, quickly, also in the interest of time, would like to hear about how that plays a role when we work with communities like we do at the Nudge, when we work with beneficiaries who don't have access to these platforms or these solutions themselves. How does that play out? Just a quick response from you on that front.
So I think, yeah, largely echoing what Karthik's experience has been, true to the form. The training has been what the bias that the training carries is reflecting in the responses that the LLM gives. So but what we should be doing is to educate and be aware when we as innovators and when we as adopters start using it. Uh, in fact, if it is trained the other way, it can be trained the opposite way too. So how do we ensure that kind of a training, or how do we getting that perspective also to AI is something that we have to work on, and mitigating it, being careful about where we deploy these solutions and respecting the sensitivities of communities, as you rightly mentioned, right? So I think not just the design per se, but also having this context layered in, being cognizant of the situation, the ground realities, the geography, the social norms of the particular place where we are working, because we are working with the communities and we cannot antagonize the communities in our quest to have technology adopted everywhere. So I think having these basic principles, having empathy and understanding of where we are, I think that is one uh, guiding principle, at least for us at the Nudge, to solve for. You're on mute. Mamta, you're on mute.
Oops, sorry about that. So thank you, Vignesh and Kartik, for joining us for this conversation today. I don't know how we pass this 1 hour. I think the more we talk about it, the more questions come to mind, and probably we'll do a second edition of this to pacify our own sort of thirst for learning more about AI in the social sector. So yes, thank you for joining us today, to our audience members as well. Quickly calling out the curated conversations opportunity. If you're someone who's interested in working in the sector, we have some priority critical roles listed there. Sign up for an opportunity to speak with a nudster to understand the role a little better. And the Nudge is always hiring for a range of roles across functions, so do visit our website as well. And once again, Kartik and Vignesh, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And to our audiences, we'll see you at the next edition of Jigyasa.
Thanks so much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks so much. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.